Hi, welcome. Welcome to Project Hindsight's Memorial Retrospective project. Today, I am so happy to have Steve Dahmus here. Steve is a student of Robert Schmidt and a friend of Bob and Ellen both. And you have your own website that you run. It's called universalcompass.com. People can find you there. And you have a client practice, a robust client practice. And I'm excited to talk to you about your practice. But first, give us a little bit of background. How did you first encounter Robert Schmidt and what captured your imagination about his work?
So I started studying astrology. Thank you for having me on here, first and foremost.
Yeah,
Really
thank you.
appreciate the opportunity greatly. I started studying astrology in 1995, and back then it was, of course, just modern astrology. And I studied all the greats, very influenced by people like Jeffrey Wolf Green. Um, um, and Melanie Reinhardt and Liz Green and Jan Spiller. Those were some of the greats of modern astrology. And I pretty much had gone through all of, I think, what was the best of modern astrology, studying the books on my own. Say by 2003, so 8 years, I felt like I had most of it under my belt. Also, Bernadette Brady with her work on fixed stars was also very seminal to me. So in 2008, so this is 13 years after I started, I went to a astrology conference, NORWAC in Seattle. And I was walking down the hallway, and there was this video screen up above people's heads. There were a bunch of vendors, and there was a video screen up there. And there was this intricate timing method with a chart of Greek astrology. I didn't know it was Greek astrology at the moment. And it was a booth by Kurt Manwaring. And the intricacy of it was startling compared to modern astrology. Modern astrology is great with kind of mid and large level topics of a person, the psychology of a person, the stretch of their life, but the intricacies can be lacking at times. And I saw this hyper detail on the screen above Kurt's head. I said, "What is this?" So that was my introduction to Greek astrology. And it was actually a screen on Zodiacal releasing of spirit. And I foolishly thought, oh, well, if I learn about Zodiacal releasing of spirit, I would learn about Greek astrology. So it turned out, I can't remember when I think it was probably May. I think they usually have their conferences at the end of May. And so Robert Schmidt was offering a class on the lots in November of 2008. So I went, and it was amazing. So it was held in Cumberland, Maryland. And what impressed me about Robert Schmidt is the academic rigor, the tour de force of the Platonic metaphysics behind what are methods. As an astrologer, you just want methods, methods, methods. So you can tell all these wonderful things to your client. Well, Schmidt, he didn't give that. He gave the structure behind everything, and it was rather frustrating at first. But like so many of the rest of us, after a while, that's the thing you really want, because you realize that's the thing that makes what you're looking at. That's the thing that makes life. That's that thing that makes the life of the client why it's doing it. The method is simply getting that deeper information. And so, yes, that's wonderful. But to understand this depth of knowledge behind the thing is incredible. So he was so scholarly, so academic. I felt like I never wanted to leave, and just be there and absorb knowledge for the rest of my days. That wasn't to be the case, unfortunately. I think he only did one intensive live in person after that, which I couldn't attend. So the thing with Robert Schmidt and his work that's so different is the profundity of what's behind a chart or behind um, the conceptualization of things, like just the understanding of the sex, which, you know, oh, you could go, okay, day sect, night sect, but there's this whole philosophical rendering that goes into that. There's like 25 items on each side of the column for day sect and night sect. And I've kind of done a little study on people who were born during the day versus the night, and it really does follow. They tend to have a different philosophy of life in general, whether they're born in the day or the night. And that's really important to understand when you're doing a reading. So just the breadth of wisdom that you get from what he teaches is, you know, it's deep with Liz Green, it's deep with Melanie Reinhardt, but it's a medium depth
Yeah.
into that topic of Chiron or Saturn. But with Robert Schmidt, it's the whole field of astrology, it's the whole field of life and living. He did a class, and I forget which one it was, where he talks about the basic structure of Greek astrology. And it was, you know, he goes into the alphabet and how you form the Greek letters and how that informed the astrological method and the gematria behind it. And it just goes on and on and on. And it was
Yes.
a whole religious superstructure in itself. I mean,
Yes.
I think I was crying at the end. It was, I've heard other people talk about how beautiful that was. That's Schmidt. He spent years getting this information, and it should have been his to disseminate. And he gained more and more depth of knowledge and information as the years and decades went on. And so things changed after a time and got better. Um, but you just listen in rapture to what he has to say about astrology. There's no one that can touch him.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no one.
One of the things that when you're talking about that he's getting at the philosophical framework behind the astrology, it actually reminds me of this passage in Anne of Green Gables. I'm reading it with my youngest daughter right now, and Anne at one point looks at a scene and she says, oh, that's a poem. And her friend says, no, that's not a poem. A poem is the words. And Anne says, no, the words is what comes after. The poem is the heart and the soul and the spirit of the thing, and then the words is, how you put it into a workable format or something like that. And what you're talking about sort of reminds me of that. But
Yeah.
so tell me, how did you continue to interface with Schmidt's work then after 2008? Did you, as many people do, go back and say, like, okay, I want to start and listen to his older material now? Or how did you then continue? I know that they had a small group of students that they did publish later, the 2011 basic course part 1, and then parts 2, 3, and 4. They were, like I've said in the past, they were choosy about who they published that to, but I know that you did purchase those courses when they came out, 2011, and then I think 2 of them were in 2015 and 1 was in 2016 or something like that timing. So I know you would have purchased those courses when they came out, but tell me about how you went through the work.
So I wanted his latest stuff. I didn't
Yeah.
want to go 10 years back and
Yeah.
to learn something only to learn that, well, we're not quite right. We've changed that. I didn't want to waste my time. So I just jumped right in with the 2011. I bought his book. I couldn't wait for the book to arrive. And I got it. I'm like, oh my God, this is so complex. And it's fantastic. I still use it to this day. So I just would take all the courses as they came out, one by one, recently I have, well, let's see, when Ellen was still alive, I got some of the older material from her.
Uh-huh.
Um, but frankly, I take probably 6 to 10 months to just for one course,
Yeah.
because it's Platonic metaphysics. It's difficult stuff. It's not like how we think. And to truly understand, at least for me, I have a Mercury retrograde, so we think very deeply. We just take our time learning something, and I feel like I really learn it when I do it that way.
Uh-huh.
So my experience has always been with his latest material, including the last class on the supposed question of the house problem.
Yes, the house systems
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah. And that's one of my favorites, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that one as well. So, so one of the things that you and I have talked about is your work with the fixed stars and the constellations and how they interface with the faces. And I want to start by playing a clip of Schmidt talking about this in the end of the basic course part one, the language of astrology. And then I actually want to play you a clip of him from about 10 or 11 years before that, where you can hear the beginnings of him thinking about this problem. Um, so I'll play those for you. And I guess, can you explain if we have anyone listening that needs to know what the faces are, what the decans, could you just explain that just real briefly?
Sure. I want to loop back to your former question just for a minute. There is another incredibly important avenue that I went down with Schmidt's material that was equally important to taking the classes. In my 2008 LOTS intensive, I met a friend, Dale Nelson, and he's been a friend ever since. And we regularly will discuss the material of Schmidt's. We'll either take a class together, or there's something that is brought up for us that we want to bounce against the other one. We'll talk for 4, 6, 8 hours on a Zoom call. And that's incredibly important. You can't just, I think, be in a silo by yourself. It's really important to engage with another to understand this material, at least for me.
Yeah.
Give a shout out to Dale. I wouldn't be here without him.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you for saying
Okay.
that.
So let's go to decans. This has been a favorite area of mine. My probably best specialty is medical astrology, but my favorite love is working with the fixed stars and the constellations. It's just my thing. I was an amateur astronomer starting at age 16. Um, the private high school I went to had the largest telescope for any high school in the state of Minnesota. Just happened to be right. And we had this amazing Russian priest astronomer who was an astronomy professor, and he really guided the club along that I was part of. So I've always had this amazing love for the stars and the constellations. It's just so, I don't know. It's just such magical, I think. So magical to me. So in 1999, Bernadette Brady's book on fixed stars came out, and that was electric to me. It was the first time that we're seeing fixed stars being talked about, not in terms of kind of archaic weirdness where, this star will give you death by dog bite, or this star will, you'll become an undertaker or die by being buried alive and crap like that. It's totally useless to a client. She really brought out fixed stars as what they could be. And so then, I think it was the 2011 class, I heard Schmidt mention about the faces. And what this is in Greek astrology, each 10 degrees, so let me say it another way. Each sign is divided into 3 parts. These parts are 10 degrees each, and they're called a decan. We get our English word decade from it. And in that decan was put a bunch of different things. And one of those things were constellations. So these constellations, this method is called faces. the Greek word prosopon means a mask that their actors would wear in their Greek plays, so that you can think of each 10 degrees as a different countenance or expression of that sign. And they refer, like I said, to constellations that miraculously go beyond the zodiac. I've always thought it was ridiculously stupid as an astronomer, amateur astronomer, that we only look at 12 constellations. There are 88 in the sky.
Yeah.
The ancient Arabs used star lists of 1,100 stars. The Chinese had 1,300 stars. And in these Western astrology books, you'll get a list of maybe 178 stars, 100 stars. I think the most was 278 in one of the books. And so these constellations are either above or below the zodiacal constellation in question. And how this works is these constellations actually have different stories and myths associated with them from different eras of time and different cultures. And what we find is the details of these stories and myths actually show up in a person's life in very real and sometimes very striking ways. I've been using this since probably 2011 or so, and it's just phenomenal.
That's excellent. So, do you mind if I play a clip of Schmidt talking about this
Sure,
too,
yes.
and sort of anchor it a little bit?
Sure.
Okay.
In the later Hellenistic tradition, the doctrine of the decans almost seems to be vestigial. It's often faithfully reported, but little use is actually made of it. I argue that it was an essential component in the original system, whose original significance was simply lost. I said above that 5 things must be done to fully conjugate a verb. I've dealt with 2 of them. I'll address the remaining 3 in the next part of this course. Let me conclude this discussion of the decans with a conjecture I've been entertaining for a number of years now. In Greek times, there was a normalized picture of the sky in which there were altogether 48 constellations. This picture can ultimately be traced back to Eudoxus. Now, it's always seemed extremely tempting to me that there are 36 extra zodiacal constellations and 12 zodiacal constellations, making a total of 48 constellations in the sky. What's tempting is to associate 36 decans with the 36 extra zodiacal constellations, 18 above the zodiacal belt and 18 below. Here, I'm suspecting an intention to project the spherical whole into the zodiacal belt itself, where each decan would correspond to one of the constellations. The first decan to one of the constellations below the zodiac, the third to one of the constellations above it, with the second decan sometimes corresponding to a constellation above the zodiac and sometimes below it, alternating by representation. But since in terms of face, the sequence of decans is also a kind of projection of the 7-zone sphere of the planets into the zodiac, where the 3-dimensional spatial order of the planetary zones is now represented in a spatial sequence around the zodiacal belt, it would indeed make the decans a kind of interface between the planetary realm and the higher realm of the extra zodiacal constellations.
So this is what you took this and ran with it, and I can't
Oh
wait
my
to
God,
see
I
more.
remember that so well.
Yes. So do you want to hear this from about 10 years before that? It's less polished, but you can hear Schmidt sort of grappling with this same concept and how, you know, getting sort of to what you were talking about his scholarly rigor, to hear him grappling with this 10 years before, 11 years before, and working with it for that long, you know, and so many of his concepts are like that, but I think you're going to like this too. Now, does it share this other screen now?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Let's see.
Of the birth recording for each year is.
This is
Okay?
just a little stuff.
And
Okay, here
we
it
got
comes.
The same thing, an astrological concept is understood in one way, but yet is at the same time direct astrological language. Now you could say, because it turns out that every planet has five, belongs to five decanates, except for Mars, which belongs to six. So you can say, well, these are the different faces that planet can put on. You can look at it that way. Okay, that's one way you might interpret, and that's kind of useful and so forth. But what's really interesting is that Hellenistic astrology does not use the decanate planet or the planet associated with the decanate as a ruler, and that it is not subject to the familiarization relationship. In other words, when Ptolemy deals with the dignities that fall within familiarization, it's only domicile, exaltation, bound, and trigon. They have decanates and a planet associated with the decanate, but there's something really mysterious about the decanates, which is their origin appears to be extra zodiacal. All the texts say that the decanates arise from the shaping of parts of the zodiac by certain extra zodiacal entities. They shape them into the face that in some way resembles a certain planet. Now, because of the extra zodiacal reference we are dealing with, which is clearly, and also the principal mode of interpretation of the decanates is to associate them also with co-rising constellations, ones that rise at the same time as that little piece of the zodiac. Okay, there appears to be something a little higher in order in the relationship of a decanate to a planet than the relationship of a sign to a planet. And not only that, the decanates are arising because they have been worked on, the zodiac itself gets worked on by something one step higher. Yet it is a face. It's a face. Remember, in all these models, you have, the signs are somehow the higher part of the soul, the planet somehow the lower part of the soul. But here is a different concept for mediating between the signs and the planets. One that is different than familiarization, one that I would be tempted to call, you might say, the interface between the signs and the planets, not via familiarization.
One thing that I got out of that last clip is he's going to a very important place, which modern astrology has pretty much completely lost, which is beyond the zodiac. I use fixed stars. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fixed stars that are in other constellations beside the 12. They're incredibly useful and important. And so this faces is leading Schmidt out there to this, it's like people will say, well, why would you need the fixed stars or the asteroids or some of these other things? It's a different layer of information. It's different moods, different feel. I can't quite explain it, but when I do a reading just on the faces, I do a reading just on fixed stars. When I do that, it's a whole different feel that I get out of the reading, and the client responds in that way too. It's just seems to be, I think he said, of a higher order. It feels something like that. I think in Vedic astrology, the stars are the ultimate place of wisdom. I think in Greek metaphysics is the same way. It's realm of the ideas. So it really takes you to this other place when you use these other constellations and individual fixed stars.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to also add, in the first clip that you put, he says that these faces are an essential component of astrology. And I thought, what? How come we're not using it, for God's sakes? So I went and investigated the faces. And for those who don't know, we know about them from a Greek poet in the 3rd century BC named Aratus.
Yes, and that's spelled with an A. It sounds like it's spelled with an E, but it's Aratus.
Right.
Yes.
Aratus, or some people might say Aratus. and in his poem Phenomena. So he lists all the 36 faces, and he gives credit to Eudoxus. Now, in astrology, people will use Ptolemy's list of faces. So I first used Ptolemy's list of faces, and it didn't work.
Okay.
The constellations that came up with the planets were not mirroring things in people's lives at all. It was really strange. So that's when I went and researched out Aratus and got
Okay.
his phenomena list straight from Eudoxus, and that list is very different than Ptolemy's list.
Okay.
And when I started playing with Aratus's list via Eudoxus, it works perfectly. And I've been using that for 14, 15 years now. And that helped me decide that Schmidt was right, that Eudoxus started this astrology. It didn't start in the 1st century AD, like most of the astrological world thinks. And this idea has been absolutely rock solid, shown to be the case by institutions and individual academic researchers into astrology, that it started in the academies of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and then went to Alexandria. And there was a whole compendium of astrology that was developed in the first 3 centuries before the 1st century AD.
Mm-hmm.
Burning of the Library of Alexandria then led to the confusion after that.
Mm-hmm.
It was Schmidt saying this about the faces that led me to Eudoxus, that was like, oh, yeah, he did start it, because here are the faces. These faces are intricate, they're complicated. Obviously, he's got a deep astrology going. So that was kind of an interesting side note.
Yeah. And Eudoxus did write, but his works don't survive. And Aratus wrote, it was very common in that time, somebody would write a very important philosophical work or a scientific work, and then a poet would actually turn it into would versify it and make a poem. Yeah. Yeah. So Aratus had sort of versified Eudoxus's work, which is cool. So that's the only part that survives. Yeah.
Thank God for him.
Yeah. So show us how you do use it, how you do.
So I decided to use somebody's chart that's very timely, rather than say a client or my chart. So should I just screen share now?
Oh yeah, I think you should be able to see if you can. Otherwise, I can make it so you can.
I'm sending a request.
Yeah.
Okay. Donald Trump. We're going to look at up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different items in his chart, depending on how much time you give me. We're going to look at his chart using faces, simply faces, simply constellations beyond the zodiac. We're not even going to talk about what sign it's in, what aspect it makes, what house it's in, none of that. So let's start in. First off, so I'm using Solar Fire version 9. And this is a list of 64 major stars based on Bernadette Brady's book, Fixed Stars. I've made my own list of about 750 fixed stars. I had to make my own because there was no other list out there. It took about 2 years to compile. And that can get even more intricate, but this is a good general way to look at a person with these 64 major stars. 64 is just an arbitrary number. So let's look at his sun. Sorry, this is parents. We're going to do that later. So the faces, let me explain it visually. So in a whole sign chart, an entire house is a sign. And each sign is divided into thirds. The first 10 degrees, this might be a little bit easier for people to pick up on if they're not familiar with this technique. they can see it visually, the second set of 10 degrees, and the third set of 10 degrees. So each of these sets of 10 degrees is called a decan. Over time, the Greek Egyptians put more items into each decan. They would put names of spirits and gods, goddesses, or concepts. Then Persians and Indian astrologers would put in items to each 10 degrees. The Arabs, Europeans, and each of these 10 degrees is actually what created the minor arcana of the tarot. That's also not commonly known.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've been thinking about that a lot since you told it to me.
So into each decan then, or each decan was a face, and this refers to those constellations beyond the zodiac. So let's look at Donald Trump's sun. Now, this is meant to be an apolitical presentation. It doesn't matter how you view him, what party you're affiliated with. We're going to look at Donald Trump as Donald Trump sees himself and how in ways we see him as well. So his sun is in the third decan of Gemini, along with his north node and a very important lot called the lot of exaltation. This is one of the main lots to look at for what should a person do for career. So with north node, lot of exaltation and sun, this is going to be a pretty important face to look at. And let's see here. This corresponds to the constellation Auriga. Let's go find Auriga and see what it's about. So this is a piece of software called Starry Night Pro. It's sold to amateur astronomers. They can run their amateur telescopes with it if they want. So it's very accurate. You can find, all 11 million objects in the universe or something. Database is huge. So here is Auriga. Auriga is a very strange constellation in that it is, for us, the charioteer. So you see his chariot's whip. And the Greek myth is that he was the son of Athena, pretty sure Athena, who was a prophetess. And so the son had the gift of prophecy as well. And that's what the snake legs or the snake bottom is recalling, that he has this gift of prophecy. But for some reason, and this is where it gets weird, they were ashamed of that. And so they put him in a chariot to hide the snake bottom. Now, if you're Athena, you're not going to be ashamed of your prophesying. And the sun wouldn't be ashamed either. There's a reason why this is kind of odd. I'll get to it in just a minute. So they put him in a chariot. That's why he has a charioteer's whip. And then, but for some reason, he's holding a mother goat, a female goat, with two kid goats. The Greek myths don't really explain that. It's like, what is going on? Why does a charioteer have goats? There's no connection whatsoever. When I started studying astrology in 1995, I was taught that the Greeks did all of these constellations, they did the chart, they created all the meanings of the planets. Turns out none of that's true. The first time we have a chart is in 410 BC, and it's from ancient Mesopotamia. The meanings of the Greek deities are all based on Mesopotamian deities. And so it is with astrology. Almost all of the constellations we use were originally Mesopotamian constellations. The Egyptian had constellations, but we don't use the Egyptian constellations. There are some that the Greeks added, some that were added in the Age of Enlightenment, but for the most part, this is a Mesopotamian sky. They created the meanings of the planets, they created the meanings of the signs, the zodiac, pretty much everything, and the chart itself. So when you go back into the history of constellations, back to 2000, 3000, 4000 BC, you are looking at constellations that suddenly start to make sense. The Greek layers get confusing and odd, and this is a good example. So this was not originally a charioteer in ancient Mesopotamia. It was a shepherd. And it arose at a time of year when sheep would be handled and taken to pasture. So these constellations were like a calendar for people who were illiterate. And so this figure was of a shepherd of his people as well. And that's where Donald Trump comes in. He really believes that he is trying to take this country in a place that's much better. Whether you agree with that or not, it's not part of the presentation here. And he feels like he is the shepherd to this movement to try to keep the country away from bad actors, bad influences, bad people. Now, why the chariot? Well, because over time, the sky moves. So the constellation that rose this morning locally where you live at sunrise is not the same constellation that would have risen 5,000 years ago. Briefly, that's due to the wobble of the Earth. And the wobble of the Earth is caused by the pull of the gravity of the moon on the Earth, but especially the pull of the gravity of the sun. That causes this wobble, and that wobble causes the sky to move over time. It's known as the precession of the equinoxes. So over time, this constellation, the shepherd, slipped, and it started rising at the wrong time of the year when shepherds would do their thing. But it did, we think, start rising at the time in spring, when that was one of the times that people would go to war in ancient Mesopotamia. They would go to war with each of the other city-states. And chariots were the prime dangerous war machine of that era. And so that's where the chariot comes in. And by the time the Greeks show up in the 4th century BC, this stuff has been thousands of years of layers. Eudoxus is known to have gone to Mesopotamia to study astrology. He gets this constellation and compiles it together. And it's just an odd assemblage. But when you go back to the original meaning, Donald Trump sees himself as the shepherd of the country. I don't think that's too far removed from what he might say of himself. Some might say, well, there's a real aggressiveness to him. And there is an aggressiveness to a chariot. Also, interestingly enough, I don't know if I should go there or not, but this constellation also talks about a fight in a person between, this is from Bernadette Brady, love of freedom versus the desire for domestication, the need for a partner and desire for a family, struggling against the need for freedom with no commitment. These are the two themes such a person will be juggling. I think of Donald Trump's many affairs, this kind of stepping out of the confines of a marriage and family, kind of going back and forth between the two. So with our North Node and a lot of exaltation, you can see that this is his life work ultimately, not in the beginning of his life, because North Node says it's going to be later. But later on in life, he will see his identity as a shepherd of a nation, in his work, a lot of exaltation, his career, shepherding the country in the right direction. Now let's go to the ascendant. So the ascendant in this chart is at 2958 Leo. Some people believe it has a Virgo ascendant. I really think Leo fits from what I can see. So it's in the third decan of Leo, and his Mars is there too. In fact, Mars is the confine lord of the chart. The ascendant there is in this red section of degrees. Red is Mars. And so Mars here is not just Mars, but it's the confine lord, what he is confined to do in this life. And the third decan of Leo corresponds to the constellation Draco. Once again, let's go find that.
And I seem to remember Schmidt saying that the face of the rising degree represents like the overall personality too. Am I remembering that correctly, or do you use that?
I don't remember him saying that, but I would definitely agree, since the first house is the house of the sense of self. And you know, it's our instincts, it's our sense of selfness. So I would definitely agree with that. So here's Draco. I'm going to read you Bernadette Brady's work on this, and then I'm going to go back to an older origin. So the dragon is put here in mythology to guard the exit from this world, understood as the pole star. So right now the pole star is here at Polaris in the constellation Ursa Minor. But you can see this red circle that perfectly inscribes the dragon. This is an astronomical circle, and it is the position of the pole star at various eras of time. So, for instance, in 4000 AD, this is where the pole star will be. In 6000 AD, this is where it will be. In 3000 BC, it was down here at Thuban, which Egyptian temples are said to be oriented to, with the shafts that come out of the side of the Egyptian temples, the pyramids. Here is the position in 2000 BC. Here's 1 AD. So what you're looking at is that older thing I mentioned earlier, the precession of the equinoxes caused by the wobble of the earth. This causes the position of the pole star to change. Now, the pole star mythologically is the exit, Bernadette Brady says, of this world. This celestial dragon guarded the greatest treasure of all, the pivot point of the world. It never slept because it never set. This was also the crocodile of the Egyptians, who devoured any dead beings whose hearts were too heavy for the scale of judgment, thus stopping them from immortal life at the pole. This was in Greek myth. So this Draco is a guardian of great treasure. It shows up in people's lives in Pablo Picasso, linked with his son. It's part of his identity. He was considered to be one of the greatest artists of the 20th century, one of the most prolific artists. He created over 20,000 works, each of them having value even before his death. An instance of the dragon's influence letting an immense treasure flow to the world. So remember, this constellation Draco is about treasures, guarding treasure, the treasure of immortality. So Pablo Picasso created these treasures of art. Another way this showed up was in the chart of Sir Isaac Newton. This constellation was associated with the moon and the main star Thuban of this constellation. Newton had an emotional attitude towards his work. He jealously guarded his treasures, which were his ideas and theories. Namely, he invented calculus, the new and powerful instrument that carried modern mathematics above the level of Greek geometry, but he did not publish these theories. So over time, he withdrew into solitude, and somebody else figured calculus out and took credit for it. And he had to enter into bitter emotional battles over establishing his claim to calculus. But he kept the treasures just to himself, as opposed to Pablo Picasso, letting them out to the world. So there's different ways that this idea of treasures can show up. So how it fits with Donald Trump is, this is how he sees himself, as gathering treasures. You know, Mar-a-Lago, the Trump building, all these hotels and golf courses and things all over the world, in the Arab world, in Moscow, these rich things, these treasures. It's, I think, a quite striking example of this constellation. But also on a deeper layer, this idea of guardian. So the Greeks say that, I believe it was Athena who threw this dragon up to the top of the world. It's kind of a weird, twisted myth. But when you go back to the original Mesopotamian layer, it makes all the sense in the world. So after Marduk, in the Babylonian era of Mesopotamia, defeats the deity of the underworld, Tiamat. He takes one of her creatures that was evil, namely a dragon, and puts it up in the center of the sky to guard this great jeweled nail that he thrusts into the earth and up into the sky to recreate world order and to end chaos. This idea of a world pillar, world nail, world tree is very old, very widespread. And to guard that great jeweled nail, he put this evil creature, now turned to good. But it was a dragon. And so the little bear was actually the wings of this dragon. And it flew around and around for all of eternity, guarding that nail that held order. So if you bring this to Donald Trump, I mean, he wants to establish a new world order with, you know, the tariffs. He just spoke at the UN. He doesn't like the world order that's been created before him, and he is the guardian of a new way of doing things. That's how he sees himself. Whether you agree with that or not, it doesn't matter. That's how he sees himself. And I think that is a realistic and fair assessment of how he views what he wants to do with the world.
Super interesting.
Let me do a couple more.
Yes.
So now let's go to his moon. And notice we haven't talked about house or sign or aspect at all.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we've gotten a lot of information about him so far. So it's at 2112 Sagittarius, which puts it into the third decan again, along with his south node of Sagittarius. And that corresponds to the constellation Lyra, which I was kind of surprised at, because Lyra is quite the mystical, spiritual constellation. So let's go get Sagittarius, just for a good visual on this. So there's Sagittarius. And third face is the constellation Lyra. So it will be above the zodiacal constellation in question. You can see the software is taking us way, way to the north. This is where they're not even close whatsoever.
Okay.
In fact, this is Lyra is right next to that red circle around Draco. All right, so Lyra, let's read about it from, again, once again, Bernadette Brady. I like to give credit to people who have spent their days, hours, and years compiling this information. I think that's a good thing in this field. And there we go. Different cultures have called this constellation by many names, but the common thread is the theme of a musical instrument. The Greeks thought of it as the lyre of Orpheus. It was made from a tortoise shell by Hermes as an infant and later given to Orpheus by Apollo. In India, this group is linked to a vulture. The main star is Vega, one of the great stars of the sky. Sorry. It's one of the most beautiful and brightest of the stars in the sky. It is linked through Orpheus to magic and divine spells. Those who are influenced by it are full of charisma and have been touched by the other world. The Greeks' myth of Orpheus is about a musician whose music could tame the wildest of animals. And it's also in this sense in which Vega is the star of music. The fact that it was rising when Mozart was born, a man considered by many to be one of the greatest composers of all time, seems a fitting and obvious statement. For music is a spell, and music can be spellbinding. Now, Bernadette Brady says this star shows creative, mysterious skills that can be used by the artist or the criminal. It is a beautiful, magical star and will give all that it touches a charismatic quality. You will have great charisma or great artistic gifts. Your role will be to realize these gifts without deception. So there's a famous world leader, I won't say by name, who was pretty charismatic and created a lot of trouble, who had this same star present in his birth chart. But it's this charisma that I think fits Donald Trump so well. He can just do what he wants, say what he wants, run people, run organizations, run whole things, and people just go, oh, okay. People just respond to this kind of magical power he seems to have that flusters his opponents. And it is this charisma, this constellation, this star, out of all 88 constellations, is probably the most charismatic constellation and star of all 88. There might be one or two others. But charisma really belongs to this star, and that is such a Donald Trump thing. It's his moon. So he just has it naturally. It's not something he grew into. He developed it early on, and it's very close to him and something he's able just to bring out at will. I think it's a really striking example of this constellation, actually. So I'm going to do one more. This is a nod to Zodiacal. Well, it's a nod to Greek astrology, in that we're going to use the lot of spirit. So for those of you who don't know, in Greek astrology, there are 7 hermetic lots. Actually, I think I made a mistake earlier. The intensive that I went to, run by Schmidt in 2008, was on the 7 hermetic lots, not Zodiacal release of spirit. I think I might have said Zodiacal release.
I think you said it right. Hmm.
Okay. So I'm not going to go into big explanation because it might lose people, but modern astrologers know about the part of fortune, and they think it's from Arabic astrology, and that's just about money. Well, it's not
Mhm.
from Arabs, and it's not just about money. It's actually a very ancient concept that's older than Plato and wider than Greeks. It referred to a goddess who brought you your fates. We call it fortune because the Roman goddess who filled this function was named Fortuna, but she's modeled after the Greek original Tuke. So those of us in Greek astrology know this point as Tuke more accurately. So she brings us your fate as we move through our bodily existence. So these lots are about fate. And they're divided into hard fate and good fate lots. And then one is a free will response. That's this one. The lot of spirit, its definition from Paulus Alexandrinus, who lived in the 300s AD, obviously in Alexandria. Here's his definition. Spirit happens to be Lord of soul and character and mindfulness and every mental faculty. And sometimes it also cooperates in the subject of action. Now that's 1600-year-old language. And I mean, what did you just say? So the translation is, this point is one of the most important points in the entire chart. It's where you develop not just only your character, but also your soul. So what house it's in, what sign it's in, what face it's in. This is where you develop and evolve. This is also how you use your mind. That's what the mindfulness part referred to. But also, it says it sometimes cooperates in the subject of action. This is the free will lot. This is where you make a free will decision to act upon the fate that has been befallen you, whether good or hard. Do you see where this gets into deep philosophical things that just go on, and it's rich, it's explanatory, it's the full meal deal, right?
Yeah.
How life works. And that's what Schmidt gave us. No one else gave us that. So this lot of spirit, in the Greek, the word is daimon. The early Christians perverted this word into demon to vilify astrology so they could get more members. Daimon is used in computer language about parts of computers code. There's a whole philosophical thing behind daimon. I won't get into it for our purposes today.
Yeah.
So this daimon is where Donald Trump develops his character and his soul, how he uses his mind and how he responds to the fate that befalls him, whether good or hard. Now, I will note that in the second half of his life, it's in the second house of money, which is rather appropriate. But it falls into the first phase of Pisces. Which corresponds to the constellation Cetus. Let's go find it. First, let's find Pisces. And, for those in modern astrology, Pisces, we see in the charts of a lot of generals, they have this feeling of the all, of the universal, the whole group. And that is Donald Trump's view. He's working for the whole group, the whole country. Now let's find Cetus. It should be beneath Pisces, because it is the first phase. And you can see the software is taking us beneath Pisces. And there it is. It is a monstrous undersea creature. Let's read about it. Once again, from Bernadette Brady. According to the Greeks, Cetus is the sea monster who was sent to devour Andromeda in that myth. Perseus saved her by using the severed head of Medusa, which turned the sea monster to stone. But the stories of this whale in the sky predate the Greek versions. And that's as far as Bernadette takes us. She says, this constellation more represents an unknown beast from the depths, rather than some gentle whale. Aratus referred to this constellation as the hateful monster Cetus, so it's not a gentle whale. Aratus is 300s BC. Where is he getting this idea that it's hateful monster Cetus? Well, he's a poet, he's not an astrologer, he's getting from Eudoxus. Jobs, so Jobs is another great source from 1965, husband-wife team on information of constellations and stars. Jobs refers to this representing a monster that rises from the dark nether sea with a ravenous appetite for humans. So what's going on here? Well, if you go back to the original Mesopotamian constellation, this is one of the creatures of the goddess of the underworld. Her name was Tiamat. And she was ever trying to create chaos, ever trying to destroy the order of the gods. And she almost succeeded. And this was one of her evil creatures. You heard that characterized by Job. Job's, you heard it characterized by Aratus as something very dark and monstrous. The main star is Menkar. So this constellation represents a human-eating monster. By representation, it really represents the human unconscious, or the collective unconscious, which, like a beast from the deep, can erupt with moments of great collective insight or bring chaos and mayhem. And Donald Trump is known for one thing, especially bringing chaos to a situation. This is his lot of spirit. This is where he develops his soul and his character, how his mind works. His free will response to the life that he is exposed to is to bring chaos. Now, he's bringing chaos to destroy an old world order that doesn't work. He thinks it's a good idea. Others are horrified at this. Again, the political view is not necessary or useful here. How does Donald Trump see himself? That's what the chart is telling us. And his job, where he develops his soul, is to bring chaos. This is a striking example, again, of ancient Mesopotamia through the Greeks, through Schmidt's resurrection of the faces.
Very cool. Yeah.
Let me just finish this here. For an unconscious beast would, and indeed has, both in the collective history and in the lives of individuals, emerge suddenly and appear to be huge, unstoppable, and destructive. Because Cetus is symbolic of these unconscious forces in the human collective, physically out of sight in the depths of the human ocean, its placement in the chart can be difficult. Again, there were world leaders. I won't mention them because I don't want to get political, but they also had this, and they were considered difficult actors.
Mm-hmm.
The positive use of this would be to achieve something for the collective. By recognizing your sensitivity to the collective, you can work with your dreams or other spontaneous images to gain greater understanding of this connection. So you get the idea.
Yeah.
So that's my final example.
Yeah,
With
that's excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that.
you're very
And it's
welcome.
interesting that the myths that work best for you with that are the older ones, and um that Schmidt references that it's such an old um it's such an old procedure that it's even considered vestigial almost, you know.
Yeah, I,
So
I think I think what we've understood about Donald Trump, it doesn't require the chart, and the chart adds to this. This is
right.
fundamental. This is baseline, and people aren't doing it in modern astrology. It's
It's
ridiculous.
almost like how you're coming into the world,
Yes.
which is interesting because yeah, that makes sense, especially thinking about entering through the North Star and having that be sort of like the umbilical point of the cosmos or something like that. Yeah, that's super, super cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. Um, so you've done so much work, and I know you've also done a ton of work with the timing procedures and with the house systems. And do you want to say anything about those? I know you did an incredible chart reading for me where we looked at the timing procedures, and I was really struck with how many timing procedures you looked at and yet how cohesive they all work together. I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to say about your work with timing procedures in general, or um the
Sure.
zodiacal releasing piece in particular. I mean that and it just the zodiacal releasing piece in itself is so interesting, the way that you work with a lot of fortune and a lot of spirit sort of symbiotically. I think that's so cool. So do you want to say anything about any of those topics?
Sure. This is another just thorn in my side topic. I once gave a ride to a budding astrologer's home from a local astrological meeting, and I said to him, "Well, what do you use? What are your methods?" "Oh, transits." I said, "Well, I do Greek astrology, and actually, transits was one of 40 some timing methods that were used, that all had to be used together like a tapestry. And transits was the last one you looked at, not least important necessarily, but the last one you looked at. And this is something Kurt Manwaring said to me back in 2008 at that Norwalk conference. He said,
Mhm.
you can misread a transit, you can mistranslate it because you don't have the context of what it means. And he was right. And it's the Greek, all the other Greek timing methods that give you the context for that transit so that now you can interpret it correctly.
Yeah, and that sometimes transits aren't even relevant if that particular planet isn't sort of in play, so to speak, at that time, right?
So here is what I'm talking about. See this list?
Yeah.
These are all different timing methods from ancient Greek astrology that are completely unknown and unused in modern astrology. And this is a partial list. I only have
Yeah.
this up because this is all the software allows me to bring up. There are 40 some. Now, do I use 40 all the time? No. But like in your reading, we probably used 5, 6, 7, 8 of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the end, we could see this gathering of momentum for events
Yeah.
that would peak. And um, it's really useful and necessary to use these different timing methods. Um, so you mentioned Zodiacal releasing of fortune. And I'll try to be really, really succinct and brief on this because this was actually a 500-page book that I read that
Yeah.
I'm going to be talking about. Um, so fortune is the part of fortune or lot of fortune. That's the fate that comes at you. That was a female goddess called Tuke. She would bring you your fate and then you have to respond. The daimon or spirit which we talked about in Trump's chart, this refers to a male deity who did something so miraculous during the Greek Golden Age that upon death, Zeus made him a demigod. And in Platonic metaphysics, once you agree to the plan of your life that was made by the three sister goddesses of fate, you then get one of these daimons, these Greek male gods, who, very typical for the old world, his job was to protect you by giving you advice, guiding you into riches, but most importantly, reminding you of the plan of the life that you
Yes.
as a soul.
Our modern analog for that would be like a guardian angel or something like that. That would sort of be like our modern vestige of that. But yeah.
And so you 2K brings you something, and then the daimon whispers through intuition to your being and says, okay, this just happened. Here's your best free will response. We hope you will do it. And then you have to make the free will decision of what you're going to do in response. And so it was this interplay that was talked about in this 500-page book by, help me with the name again, Greenbaum, Dorian?
I think, yeah.
Dorian Greenbaum from England. She had some connection to Schmidt. I don't know if it was cordial or not, but anyway, Greek astrology had this superstructure of these two, Tuke and Daimon, interacting. Tuke brings faith, Daimon says, this is your best response, and then your response. And you can track that. That's what's freaking amazing here. That's what this is about. Look at the complexity. So let's start with Zodiacal releasing of fortune. So there are 4 levels. You can see level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. There's a whole class on this, so don't think you're going to understand this, or I can explain it. But look at the intricacy of level. It's like every 4 days.
Yeah.
Every 3 days. Every 5 days on this side here. So what I do is I track the fate that's coming at a person from fortune, and then I look at what the best response would be from spirit. And it's based on a sign, and you go to what that sign is doing in the person's chart, not just standard Libra. Oh, well, it must be doing relationships. No, what is Libra doing in the person's chart? Here it is on the 3rd and 9th houses. So it's the best response would be characterized by 3rd and 9th houses. So it's this constant interplay that's superstructure over the whole life. It's fantastic.
Very cool. So, and then of course you mentioned that the house systems conversation was one of your favorite courses that Schmidt put out. And it was one of my favorites as well, to listen to him sort of take a deep dive into how he translates and how he thinks about things. So, and then you had mentioned to me that because based on that house systems conversation, you took your approach to reading charts differently, in the sense of having to make multiple charts for each person according to where the house cusp would fall.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Okay. So when I first got us introduced to Greek astrology, you had a lot of these people, a lot of these astrologers, they would only use whole sign charts. Whole sign charts, if you don't know, is where an entire sign, say in this case Virgo, is the entire 2nd house. Or the entire sign of Capricorn is the entire 6th house. So everything in Capricorn is going to be in that 6th house.
Right.
What I grew up with was something quite different, where there are floating degrees of where a house begins and ends. So objects in Leo can be in the 12th and in the 1st.
Right.
And so the purists of the Greek astrologers said, oh no, it's only a whole sign. Well, I'm sorry, I've been using this dynamical or quadrant-based system at this point for 13 years, and it works. Believe me, it's very
Yeah.
And so I don't buy your philosophical stance. And then people would say, well, there's different house systems. What's all that about? How come some people only use certain house systems? And then there was this weird option for equal house system, where the degree of the ascendant is now the degree of each sign at the beginning of a house. So 29 Scorpio, 29 Sagittarius, 29 Capricorn. I remember first seeing this back in the late 90s. Like, what is this goofy thing? So Schmidt did a class, I believe in 2018, 2017.
I think it was 16.
16? Okay. Where he said, yeah, you got to use all of these. And it's in the Greek text.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in 2008, 2009, I remember doing a reading for a client. She had Chiron in the 4th, in the whole sign chart, and Chiron in, it was either the 3rd or 5th, I can't remember, in the dynamical chart, the quadrant-based chart. And I read it. I read both of the interpretations from Melanie Reinhardt about Chiron in those houses, and she goes, "Yeah, both of those are true." It was an electric moment. It was like, oh my God, I do have to use 2 different house systems. So since 2008, I've been using whole sign and the quadrant-based house system. Well, then Schmidt came along in 2016 with his class and said, oh, there's a 3rd chart. And oh my God, he's right.
Yeah.
Again, this guy who spent years with this research. This research should not just be taken by somebody and used on their own. It should be given credit to Schmidt. He's the one that sat hour after hour after hour reading tedious Koine Greek, which is very difficult to read. He's the one that did the work, not somebody else. And there's people who've taken credit for his work, and that's absolutely wrong. It's called plagiarism. It's called stealing. So what happens here is this is the base chart. The whole sign chart is the base chart. Then they go to this goofy equal house chart. And there's reasons for that I won't go into right now, because it's not real complicated, but there's a little bit of stuff to it. This is extremely important, as it turns out. And it has to do with timing in the life of when things transpire and when they won't. How easy things are to and how to do, and how easy things are not. Easily things are not, how easy things are not to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of my Greek friends are still not sure about this dynamical chart. Well, I'm sorry, I've been using it for 30 years. They work. Then you got to add in this chart. And there are times when this chart accounts, well, okay, sorry, let me say it this way. Between these 3 charts, as I said with Chiron, there are times when Jupiter will be, say, in the 3rd house, but in the other chart, it'll be in the 4th house.
Yeah.
Guess what? Both interpretations are correct. Some readings I use Jupiter in the 3rd, some I use Jupiter in the 4th. Sometimes I use both. It depends on the nature of the topic we're covering. And sometimes, so that changeover in this example of, say, Jupiter in the 3rd versus Jupiter in the 4th, sometimes can be accounted for by the equal house chart. And it has to do with an intricate Greek method of interpretation, which I won't get into right now. But sometimes, and Dale is always asking for examples of this, Sometimes that method does not account for the fact that a planet will fall into a different house. I think we might have one here. No, we don't. So you can see here Jupiter's in the second in this chart. In the other chart, in the whole sign chart, it's in the third. That intricate Greek timing method, or no, sorry, not a timing method, but house method, does account for Jupiter going to the second. I can tell you why that happens in a little bit. But sometimes you cannot account for that, account for where a planet, a given planet, will fall into a different house. And it requires the use of the dynamical chart to get that truth. Will you use that in every reading? No, but in some readings, it will be invaluable. And so you have to look at all three charts to render a chart correctly. And this has been soundly rejected by most of the top people who are astrologers in this country.
Okay. And in that 2016 course, did it seems to me that Schmidt created a new conceptualization of what we really mean when we're talking about a house cusp. I mean, did you take it that way as well? So that you have the concept, he talks about atopos and epitopos, and that where that cusp hits. I mean, I think that most people think about house cusps as being like the border of the house, but he figures out that there's really a cusp sort of within each house. And that's why sometimes a planet will fall into one, it'll have one interpretation as being in one house and one interpretation as being in the other house, like sort of what you were saying.
So let's kind of explain what you're talking about. You look at the degree of the ascendant. In this case, it's 29 degrees of Leo for Donald Trump. Any planet in the chart that's less than 29 degrees is said to be in a condition called atopos. This term refers to the fact that they didn't really have houses. That's an Arab astrology invention, these temples of where things would happen. For the Greeks, it was all just simply in the ecliptic. You didn't have these pie-shaped wedges of things. It's a subtle distinction. Maybe some people would say not subtle. I think it is an important distinction. I'm still kind of working on that. So they were not called houses. They were called places where the topics of life happen. And so for a planet to be atopos meant off topic or out of its house. Specifically, if you have a planet, let's take that Jupiter, it's at 17 degrees Libra. That 17 is less than 29. It now is atopos, which means that it has to go to the previous house and do the affairs of the previous house before it can thrive in the house that it's actually in.
Yes, exactly.
And so Jupiter goes to the second house. We see this quite clearly in the equal house chart. Here's Donald Trump, equal house, Jupiter in the second. We also see it in the dynamical chart. Now, what this means in interpretation let's first read Jupiter in the third. Jupiter in the third, a wealth of ideas, likes to talk a lot, does it convincingly, loves big words and epic embellishments, brilliant, well-informed entertainer, popular, respected, good at imparting what has been learned. he won't come into this until he first does Jupiter in the second, which reads like this. The money spinner, consciousness of wealth, great trust in personal security and assets in the sense of ability and possessions, feels rich, independent of actual bank balance, lucky hand in money matters, carefree, content, full of trust that nothing will go wrong. So in other words, he's got to become rich before people will listen to him and his ideas. And that's how his life ran. He got wealthy, got all this name, and now he's in the office of the presidency, where his ideas now are even more powerful than his wealth.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much for going over that. I can't recommend that House Systems talk enough. I just loved it myself. And I see how and in the reading that you did for me, that also came up where there was a planet that was a topos, and it really makes a difference, and it makes the entire reading more dynamic. And I love that talk because he'll even say like, oh, well, this is how I initially translated it, but that, now I'm translating it this other way. And he gives a lot of detail. Yeah.
We should say, just to complete this, the other word we were saying is epitopos.
Yes.
And that is a planet that is at or greater than the degree of the ascendant, which we don't have anything like that in his chart, because the ascendant's at 29. But let's say his ascendant was at 10 degrees Leo. So Jupiter then would, in that case, be epitopos, because it's at 17, which is greater than 10. So it stays in the third house. It doesn't go to the second house to do that.
Right. Yeah.
And this kind of fits his life, where I think, sure, he had fame and all this stuff, but he's now one of the most powerful men in the world. I think he's come more into his own in the later life. He's in his 70s. And so with every planet being a topos, and I've had clients like this, they have to wait much longer for their life to kick in. Because every planet has to do something else in the previous house before it can actually thrive in the house that it's in, and life that is the fullness that they have. So I think it's kind of interesting. It's certainly, he has a greater existence than he did in his 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, cool. So is there anything else that you'd like to talk about before we wrap up?
I think that's it. That this using the 3 different versions of the houses of the chart, I mean, and the use of faces, and the fact that there's a lot more timing methods that we astrologers need to be using, and not be so lazy about just using transits.
Yeah.
Expensive, but it takes a lot of work to do astrology correctly, and I think it's supposed to be that way.
Yeah.
Dealing with the intricate life of a person, and the intricate Greek astrology that Robert Schmidt has exposed to us like nobody else since the time of the Greeks, has given us that ability to look that deeply and that efficaciously, so that we can help people who come for readings.
It was sort of like his own Rosetta Stone project,
Yeah.
So, and I should say for anybody listening, keep up with us. If you like our content, like, comment, and subscribe, and keep checking back with us, because Steve is working with us at Project Hindsight to put together some course material that can help practicing astrologers put these really complex and difficult topics to work. And I'm super excited about that. And I'm really looking forward to being able to offer something with you, Steve.
I look forward to bringing up the material very much so. Thank you so much.
It'll be fun. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll talk again soon.
All righty. Take care.
Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.